The metallic hiss of the automated door was a familiar sound to CT-6116, better known as Kix. Decades had passed since the Clone Wars, yet the hum of the starship, the sterile scent of recycled air, and the methodical tread of clone troopers remained constant. What had changed, profoundly and irrevocably, was the master they served. Kix, a medic whose moral compass had once pointed firmly towards the Republic and its ideals, now found himself patching up wounds inflicted in the name of the Galactic Empire under the direct, chilling command of Darth Vader. The 501st Legion, Anakin Skywalker's beloved Vader's Fist, had not been disbanded or repurposed after the Republic fell. Instead, Palpatine, in a stroke of insidious foresight, allowed Vader to retain direct operational control. The reasoning was simple: loyalty. These clones, bred and trained to follow Skywalker, transferred that loyalty, albeit twisted, to the dark apparition he had become. Their programming, reinforced by years of shared combat, formed a bond stronger than any simple Imperial indoctrination. They were his men, and he, their dark general. This unique arrangement transformed the 501st into something far more terrifying than a standard Imperial Legion. They were Vader's personal shock troops, an elite force that moved with a horrifying synergy honed by years under Anakin's command, now amplified by Vader's cold, ruthless efficiency. They knew his battle tactics, understood his nonverbal cues, and anticipated his every brutal demand. When Vader walked onto a battlefield, the ground trembled not just from his presence, but from the synchronized advance of 500 seasoned veterans who would follow him into the maw of a sarlacc pit without question. The early years of the Empire were a bloody tapestry woven by the 501st. They were at the forefront of hunting down Jedi survivors. Their intimate knowledge of Jedi fighting styles and tactics, once gleaned from fighting alongside them, now turned against them with devastating effect. When Order 66 was executed, many Jedi fell to their own clone comrades, but it was the 501st, led by Vader himself, that systematically purged the most resilient pockets of resistance. Kix remembered the chilling precision with which Captain Rex, ever the pragmatic strategist, coordinated flanking maneuvers while Vader cut through lightsaber defenses like paper. Rex, unlike Cody, had chosen to stay, a decision that haunted Kix. Rex believed he could still protect the men, even from Vader's darkness, by staying close. A naive hope Kix now knew. As the Empire consolidated its power, the 501st became the Iron Fist suppressing rebellions across the Outer Rim. They were deployed to worlds where Imperial garrisons failed, where insurgents were too well entrenched, or where local populations refused to bend. Vader would land, often alone, allowing the 501st to sweep in afterwards, picking off the shattered remnants. Their signature blue markings became a harbinger of doom, their reputation preceding them like a dark omen. This continued service, however, had a profound impact on the clones themselves. Unlike other Imperial stormtroopers, who were often fresh conscripts or genetically modified replacements, the 501st were the originals. Their accelerated aging meant many were already feeling the wear and tear of decades of relentless warfare. Their faces, once young and eager, were now etched with fatigue, their voices gruffer, yet their discipline never wavered. They were the last bastion of the true clone army, a living monument to a war long past, repurposed for tyranny. The whispers began subtly within the ranks. Older clones, those who remembered General Skywalker's humanity, would exchange knowing glances when Vader displayed a flicker of raw emotion, a rare, terrifying surge of the Force that felt less like controlled power and more like barely contained agony. Kix, with his medical insights, often wondered about the dark armor's effect on their former general. He knew the biological toll the suit took. What about the psychological one? One defining moment came during the siege of Ryloth, years after the Jedi Purge. A particularly resilient Twi'lek insurgency had dug in deep, aided by cunning guerrilla tactics. Vader, frustrated, ordered a planetary bombardment. But then, a voice, gravelly and tired, cut through the comms. "Lord Vader," it was Captain Rex. "My lord, the civilian casualties will be catastrophic. There are hidden refugee camps. General Skywalker would not approve." A profound silence descended. Every clone in the command center held their breath. To question Vader was suicide. But Rex had done it, invoking a name long dead. Vader turned, his black helmet staring at Rex. The air crackled with suppressed rage. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Vader merely said, "Proceed with ground insertion, Captain. Isolate the military targets. Minimize collateral." The order was still ruthless, but it was not the indiscriminate slaughter he had initially commanded. A flicker of something, perhaps memory, perhaps a hint of Anakin, had momentarily stayed his hand. Rex's gamble had paid off. The 501st carried out the order with precision, avoiding the mass slaughter, a small dark victory for their lingering humanity. This incident, however, was an anomaly. Mostly, the 501st remained Vader's loyal, terrifying instrument. They were integral to his personal fortress on Mustafar, providing an impenetrable cordon around his dark meditations. They were his enforcers in the meticulous hunt for the nascent Rebel alliance, often arriving before Star Destroyers, dropping from dropships like a black and blue rain, securing landing zones for the larger Imperial forces. They were the ones who stormed the Rebel bases, the ones who cleared the way for Vader to face his foes. By the time of the Galactic Civil War, the 501st were a shadow of their former numbers. Accelerated aging, attrition, and the sheer brutality of their campaigns had winnowed their ranks. Yet, the remaining veterans were unparalleled. They were the phantom limb of Anakin Skywalker, forever attached to the Dark Lord, executing his will with chilling competence. When Luke Skywalker emerged, a new, unforeseen variable entered the equation. The echoes of Anakin, the ghost of the Jedi Knight, stirred within Vader. The 501st, ever attuned to their general, sensed a shift, a subtle hesitation in his Force presence, a wavering in the dark resolve. They saw him pause, just for a moment during the skirmishes when Luke was near. They didn't understand why, but they felt it. On the second Death Star, as the final battle raged, the remaining elements of the 501st were among Vader's personal guard, standing stoically as the Emperor tormented Luke. They were there when Vader threw the Emperor into the reactor shaft, a sudden blinding flash of light and fury. And they watched as the once feared Sith Lord, their dark general, was carried away by his son, a broken, dying man revealing the face of Anakin Skywalker. In the aftermath, amidst the chaos of the crumbling empire, the few surviving members of the 501st were a lost legion. Their programming was fractured, their purpose gone. They had served their general to the bitter end, never truly understanding the man they followed, only the darkness that consumed him. Kix, one of the last remaining, simply watched the news reports of the Emperor's death and the rebellion's victory. He thought of Rex, wherever he might be, and wondered if he had found peace. The 501st had been Vader's fist, but in the end, it was a fist that had crushed the galaxy, and itself, for a master who was already lost. The crimson sun dipped below the horizon of Coruscant, casting long, menacing shadows across the cityscape. For the clones of the 501st Legion, the shift from Republic Blue to Imperial Black had been jarring, yet the core of their existence remained unchanged: duty, loyalty, and command. When the dust settled after Order 66, when the Jedi temples burned and the Republic lay shattered, a chilling directive came from Emperor Palpatine himself. Unlike other clone units, slated for integration into the faceless Stormtrooper Corps, the 501st was to remain distinct. Their commander, now known only as Darth Vader, would retain direct, personal control. Palpatine's reasoning was a twisted stroke of genius. He understood the profound, almost spiritual connection the clones had forged with their Jedi generals. For the 501st, that bond with Anakin Skywalker had been absolute. Now, that same ingrained loyalty, warped by the Force and the Emperor's dark machinations, was meticulously redirected. These clones, bred to follow him, recognized the powerful presence, the strategic brilliance even if cloaked in shadow and menace of their dark new master. Their combat programming, refined over countless battles alongside Anakin, seamlessly transferred to Vader. This wasn't mere obedience. It was an horrific synergy. The 501st knew Anakin's every battle tactic, his preferred maneuvers, his almost reckless daring. Now, amplified by Vader's cold, absolute ruthlessness, they moved as a single, terrifying entity. When Vader stepped onto a war-torn planet, the The ground didn't just tremble from his Force presence. It vibrated with the synchronized march of 500 seasoned veterans. Each stride, each weapon raised, was a testament to years of shared blood and fire, now wielded by a hand that knew only destruction. They were no longer just an army. They were Vader's fist, a living extension of his dark will, more formidable and chillingly effective than any standard Imperial Legion could ever hope to be. The transformation was insidious, yet undeniably effective. Under Darth Vader's absolute command, the 501st Legion shed any lingering pretense of their former Republic ideals, becoming something far more terrifying: his personal elite shock troops. Their once familiar blue markings, now stark against their dark armor, became a harbinger of doom across the galaxy. Their ruthless efficiency was unparalleled, amplified by Vader's own cold, calculating precision. They weren't just following orders. They were executing a shared, brutal understanding of warfare. Years spent fighting alongside Anakin Skywalker had ingrained in them a profound grasp of his audacious tactics, his instinctive responses, even his subtle body language. Now, with Anakin twisted into Vader, that intimate knowledge mutated into something chillingly effective. When Vader raised a gauntleted hand, the 501st didn't merely halt. They anticipated his next move, adjusting their formations with seamless, almost prescient accuracy. If he unleashed a surge of the Force, they instinctively braced for the ensuing chaos, ready to exploit the momentary weakness of their shattered foes. There was no need for lengthy briefings or detailed battle plans. The Legion moved with a horrifying synergy, each clone a perfectly calibrated part of a dark, unstoppable machine. Worlds that had defied standard Imperial garrisons found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer, focused intensity of Vader and his fist. They struck with lightning speed, dropping from their gunships like a black and blue rain, securing landing zones before Star Destroyers had even fully deployed. They were the ones who would systematically clear a city block, breach an enemy stronghold, or flush out pockets of resistance, always paving the way for their dark general to confront his targets. Their presence alone often broke the morale of rebels, who had heard the whispers, "Vader's fist," left nothing but devastation in its wake. They were the galaxy's nightmare, tailored by Palpatine for his most potent weapon. The air still reeked of ozone and smoke, a sickening reminder of the betrayal that had just ripped through the galaxy. For the clones of the 501st, the orders had been absolute, etched into their very being. Execute Order 66. But while other units might have simply followed directives, the 501st became something far more terrifying in the hunt for Jedi survivors, specialists in their demise. Their intimate knowledge of Jedi fighting styles, once gleaned from fighting alongside them, was now turned against them with devastating, almost surgical precision. They knew how a Jedi would move, how they would parry, where their weaknesses lay in a defensive stance, or how they might attempt to exploit an opening. This wasn't guesswork. It was a horrifying fluency born of years of shared combat. Kix, the medic, remembered the chilling efficiency. He'd seen Commander Oppo lead platoons through the ravaged corridors of the Jedi Temple, calling out tactical observations that would have once saved a Jedi's life, but now sealed their fate. Movement. Section 7. Standard Soresu Guard. Flank wide. Cover fire. These were not random shouts, but informed commands, perfectly anticipating a Jedi's defensive posture. Captain Rex, ever the pragmatic strategist, coordinated flanking maneuvers with a cold precision that sent shivers down Kix's spine. While Vader, a dark maelstrom of destruction, cut through lightsaber defenses like paper, Rex's men would be there, securing every exit, herding the desperate survivors into Vader's path, or pinning them down for the final brutal shot. "They move like Windu's guard," Rex once noted during a skirmish on Kashyyyk, his voice devoid of emotion as he directed fire. "Tight formation, rely on speed. Target their support, isolate the main blade." It was the language of a war they had won, now repurposed to hunt those they once protected. The 501st didn't just eliminate, they systematically dismantled Jedi resistance, unit by unit, individual by individual, a living, breathing testament to the darkness that had consumed their former general. They became the ultimate irony, the Jedi's greatest allies, transformed into their most effective executioners. As the newly forged Galactic Empire tightened its iron grip, the 501st Legion evolved from Jedi hunters into the ultimate instrument of Imperial suppression. Across the volatile expanse of the Outer Rim, where independent worlds bristled under the Emperor's shadow and nascent rebellions dared to ignite, the 501st became the uncompromising fist of tyranny. Standard Imperial garrisons often faltered against deeply entrenched insurgents or fiercely independent populations. But when the reports of a planet's defiance reached Palpatine, the order was often the same. Send Vader and his fist. And so, the chilling blue markings of the 501st would appear in orbit, a harbinger of inevitable doom. They were deployed to worlds like Seleucami, where separatist holdouts still festered, or to agricultural moons whose populations refused to yield their harvests to the Imperial supply lines. Vader himself would often descend first, a singular, terrifying force, creating a vacuum of fear. Then, the 501st would sweep in, a tide of methodical destruction, picking through the shattered remnants, rooting out every last spark of resistance. Kix, tending to another blaster wound on a veteran trooper named Echo, not the ARC trooper, but a clone who'd simply inherited the designation, heard the same weary pride in the voices. "Another one broken, Doc," Echo rasped. Didn't take long once Vader showed up. Their reputation preceded them like a dark plague. Tales spread of their relentless pursuit, their uncanny ability to anticipate local tactics, and their chilling efficiency in executing Vader's brutal will. On many worlds, the mere sight of their dropships, or the first crackle of their blaster fire, was enough to break a populace's spirit. They were the legion that ensured no world remained defiant for long, their name synonymous with swift, crushing subjugation. The 501st wasn't just enforcing Imperial law. They were crushing hope, one rebellion at a time. The rapid thump-thump of a clone's heart, a rhythm Kix had come to know intimately over decades, was now often accompanied by a strained wheeze, or the telltale tremor of an old injury flaring up. The 501st Legion, unlike other Imperial Stormtrooper Corps filled with fresh conscripts, remained composed almost entirely of the original Jango Fett clones. This meant accelerated aging was taking its relentless toll. What had once been youthful faces, eager for the next battle, were now etched with the deep lines of perpetual fatigue, their eyes holding a weariness that went beyond any single campaign. Their voices, once crisp and sharp, were gruffer, gravelly from years of shouting commands over blaster fire and the constant hum of starship engines. A casual glance at the mess hall would reveal more gray in their stubble, slower movements, and the subtle, unconscious aches that permeated their every joint. "My knees scream louder than a banshee in a vacuum, Doc," complained Fives, a veteran whose designation was a grim irony given his declining physical state. Kix simply nodded, applying another analgesic patch. He knew. He saw the microscopic tears in muscle tissue that healed slower, the bones that became brittle, the minds that, despite their genetic conditioning, yearned for respite. Yet, despite the undeniable physical decay, their discipline remained ironclad. They were the last bastion of the true clone army, a living, breathing monument to a war long past, repurposed for tyranny. They had served the Republic, then the Empire, and through it all, they had served him, first as Anakin, now as Vader. Their loyalty, a deep-seated instinct amplified by years of shared peril, transcended their physical deterioration. They moved with a practiced, almost mechanical efficiency, their movements honed into a deadly ballet. Each strained grunt, each wince of pain, was silently endured. They were the enduring fist, proving that even a broken body could still harbor an unbreakable will, a terrifying testament to their creators and to the Dark Lord who commanded them. The crimson dust of Ryloth choked the air, clinging to the worn armor of the 501st Legion. Years had passed since the Jedi Purge, and yet the Twi'lek insurgency on this harsh planet proved stubbornly resilient, aided by their deep knowledge of the terrain and cunning guerrilla tactics. Vader, frustrated by the protracted conflict, broadcast a chilling order across the command center: planetary bombardment. The words hung heavy in the air, promising indiscriminate destruction. Every clone in the holographic war room froze. They knew the devastation such an order would bring not just to the insurgents, but to countless innocent civilians. Even Kix, usually impassive during strategic discussions, felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. This was beyond the brutality they had grown accustomed to. This was annihilation. Then, a voice, gravelly with the weight of decades of war, cut through the tense silence. Lord Vader. It was Captain Rex. His stance was rigid, defiant. My lord, the civilian casualties will be catastrophic. There are hidden refugee camps, non-combatants. General Skywalker would not approve. A collective intake of breath could almost be heard across the comms. To question Vader was a death sentence. To invoke the name of the man he once was, to suggest a moral boundary he would not cross it, was an act of profound, almost suicidal courage. The air in the command center crackled, thick with suppressed rage emanating from the Dark Lord. Every optic scanned Vader, anticipating the swift, merciless retribution. Vader turned, his black helmet of void staring at Rex. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, to everyone's utter astonishment, Vader's voice, though still synthesized and chilling, lacked its usual immediate fury. "Proceed with ground insertion, Captain," he finally stated, the words measured. "Isolate the military targets, minimize collateral." The order was still ruthless, a grim necessity of war. But it was not the indiscriminate slaughter he had commanded moments before. A flicker of something, perhaps memory, perhaps a hint of the Anakin Skywalker he once was, had momentarily stayed his hand. Rex's desperate gamble had paid off. The 501st carried out the modified order with grim precision, avoiding the mass slaughter, a small, dark victory for the lingering threads of humanity within their ranks. It was an anomaly, a whisper of a Jedi in the heart of a Sith Lord, but it was there. Beyond the active war zones and the quelling of rebellions, the 501st Legion served another crucial, more intimate purpose for Darth Vader. They formed an impenetrable cordon around his personal fortress on Mustafar. This volcanic world, a crucible of his rebirth into darkness, was where he retreated to meditate, to commune with the DarkSide, and to simply exist in the agonizing solitude of his suit. And guarding him there, always, were his clones. The air on Mustafar was thick with ash and the metallic tang of volcanic gases, yet the troopers of the 501st stood their posts with unyielding vigilance. They patrolled the perimeter, checked every access point, and formed layers of security around Vader's inner sanctum. For Kix, who occasionally tended to injuries sustained by troopers operating in the harsh environment, the silence of Mustafar was almost as oppressive as the roar of combat. Here, the clones moved like ghosts, their boots crunching on cooled lava flows, their breaths a steady hiss through their filtration systems. They were his silent sentinels, his unblinking eyes. No Imperial officer, no curious technician, no ambitious rival dared approach Vader's private domain without the express approval of the 501st. Their loyalty was absolute, their protective instincts towards their dark general unwavering. They knew the fortress was more than just a base. It was a sanctuary for his torment, and they were its guardians. Stories circulated among the wider Imperial forces about the 501st on Mustafar, whispers of their unnerving stoicism, their almost telepathic coordination, and the sheer impossibility of breaching their lines. They were the shield around Vader's darkest moments, providing the solitude he required for his twisted meditations, and ensuring that no outside influence could disrupt his communion with the DarkSide. They were not merely guards. They were the living, breathing manifestation of his isolation, ensuring his rituals and his rage remained undisturbed, ready to leap to his defense at the faintest hint of intrusion. The nascent whispers of rebellion, once easily dismissed as isolated incidents, began to coalesce into a genuine threat. And as the scattered cells of resistance started to unite, forming what would become the Rebel Alliance, Darth Vader turned his personal legion, the 501st, into his most potent weapon in the hunt. They were the spearhead, the first wave, the relentless force that plunged into the heart of defiance. Unlike the often clumsy general Imperial forces, the 501st moved with surgical precision. They would arrive often before the ominous shadow of a star destroyer cast itself over a world, their dropships descending like black and blue rain. Their mission: secure the landing zones, neutralize preliminary defenses, and clear the way for larger Imperial forces to follow. But their true purpose was to soften the ground, to break the immediate resistance, so Vader himself could land and confront the more significant targets. Kix, once again patching up a blaster wound on a trooper known as Scorch, heard the weary but focused chatter on the comms. "Rebel strongpoint secured, my lord." Pathway cleared. It was Commander Appo's voice, as steady and methodical as ever. Scorch grunted. "Those rebels hit hard, but they break fast when the general arrives. Always do." The 500 first excelled at flushing out hidden cells, navigating treacherous terrains, and engaging in close-quarters combat where their decades of experience shone. They understood the rebel tactics: hit and run, guerrilla warfare, relying on local knowledge. But the clones of the 500 first, honed by years under Anakin and now Vader, anticipated these moves. They would systematically sweep through rebel bases, clearing out every corridor, every bunker, every defensive position. They were the ones who ensured Vader walked onto a battlefield where the primary obstacles had already been obliterated or pinned down. They created the perfect stage for his dark majesty, enabling him to stride directly into the heart of the enemy, lightsaber ignited, facing the rebel leaders, Jedi sympathizers, or whatever high-value targets he sought. The 501st didn't just fight for Vader. They paved his path, ensuring his confrontations were swift, decisive, and terrifyingly inevitable for his foes. The emergence of Luke Skywalker was a seismic tremor that rippled through the Force, and even the clones of the 501st, far removed from its mystical currents, felt its aftershocks. They couldn't articulate what it was, but they sensed a subtle shift in their dark general, a barely perceptible tremor in the absolute darkness that usually defined him. They witnessed it in the brief, almost imperceptible hesitations during skirmishes when Luke was present. Normally, Vader was a force of nature, a relentless engine of destruction. But now, when his son was near, there would be a fractional pause, a moment where the overwhelming dark resolve seemed to waver. Kix, observing Vader's medical readouts through his datapad, a relic from his Republic days, still capable of interfacing with archaic Imperial systems, sometimes noted a brief, inexplicable spike in his general's otherwise perfectly modulated vitals. A single, rapid beat of his mechanical heart, a fleeting surge of internal energy before it stabilized. The clones didn't understand the why. They knew only that this young rebel pilot, this new variable, had an uncanny effect on Lord Vader. "He goes quiet when that kid's around," whispered a veteran clone named Hawk, nudging his comrade. "Grizz." "Not the usual quiet either. More like, he's listening to something we can't hear." During the Battle of Hoth, as Vader relentlessly pursued the Millennium Falcon, his orders to the 501st were as sharp as ever, but there was an underlying tension, a predatory edge that felt different. He wasn't just hunting a rebel, he was hunting him. And when Luke later arrived at Bespin, the 501st troopers stationed there sensed the clash of titans in the Force, a raw, emotional intensity that even their hardened constitution struggled to process. They stood their ground, unwavering, but they felt the echoes of a conflict that resonated beyond blaster fire and lightsaber hums. They didn't know he was Vader's son, but they knew something profound was happening. The absolute certainty of their general's dark purpose, once a rock-solid foundation, now seemed to possess a hairline fracture, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor that only his oldest, most attuned soldiers could detect. The ghost of Anakin Skywalker, long dormant, was stirring, and the 501st, his enduring shadow, could feel its faint, unsettling pulse. The explosion that tore through the second Death Star echoed across the galaxy, a beacon of newfound hope for billions. But for the scattered remnants of the 501st Legion, it was the sound of their universe collapsing. They had stood stoically as Vader's personal guard, witnessing the Emperor's demise and the horrific, blinding flash of the Force that accompanied it. They had seen their dark general carried away by his son, a dying man, his mask removed to reveal the ghostly face of Anakin Skywalker. In the chaotic aftermath, as the Empire began to unravel, the few surviving members of the 501st were a lost legion. Their programming, once so absolute, so intrinsically linked to the will of Darth Vader, was now fractured beyond repair. The command structure that had defined their entire existence serving him had vanished in a blaze of light and fury. There was no new directive, no overriding purpose. They milled about, some taking up defensive positions out of habit, others simply staring blankly at the chaotic unfolding of the galaxy's liberation. They were soldiers without a war, weapons without a hand to wield them. The unique, terrifying synergy that had made them Vader's fist was gone, replaced by a profound, disorienting emptiness. Kix, one of the last remaining medics, watched from a distance, patching up non-critical wounds on bewildered troopers. He saw the blankness in their eyes, the lost posture. They had served their general to the bitter end, never truly understanding the man he was, only the darkness that consumed him. The whispers of the rebellion's victory, the joyous celebrations across the holonet, meant nothing to them. He thought of Captain Rex, wherever he might be, and wondered if he had found the peace that now seemed so utterly unattainable for the rest of them. The 501st had been a monument, a testament to the power of unwavering loyalty. But in the end, it was a monument to a terrible mistake, a fist that had crushed the galaxy and, in doing so, had ultimately crushed itself for a master who was already beyond saving. Their story concluded not with glory, but with a silent, desolate fading into obsolescence, forever bound to the shadow of a fallen hero.